a big part of what I've been doing, for those of you who've worked for the federal government before, you'll know what I'm saying, is that, how does this whole thing work? Because we have a really big agenda. As Jeff said, there is something happening out there in the communities where people want to do something different. And yet our machine, the infrastructure that helps at least the federal government play a role in this, is not only, in my opinion, just incredibly broken, it is really not well set up to do the kind of work that this administration's really been professing. And so how do we really, do some workarounds? How do we make this possible so that within the next 1, 2, 3, 6 years, we make a significant change, that we turn things around in ways that make the conversation that we're all here today to have the default, the way that development decisions, community-based decisions happen in sort of legal terms as of right, rather than the toughest, hardest exception. This is just so cliche, but almost every time, you start out on a pathway to try and accomplish something, and everybody tells you along the way that you can't do it. You know what? You can do this. It can be done. And we've done a bunch of things which, to me, coming from, my background, I just can't even, they seem so insignificant to me, but they've made a big difference in our ability to reach people and do things differently. So, for instance, many of you have heard me talk about this before, but it just, from anybody who's been a community activist, you know that one of the fundamental rules of making change locally is to ask people what they think before you just lay down the rules for a new program. Or if you're putting together a plan for your community, you go talk to people. What's your concern? What should we be doing? HUD had never done this before. When we went out and published what they had to call an advance notice for public comment on the Sustainable Communities Regional Grant Program, and we're just asking people's advice, that was earth-shattering. That was like, months of, bashing heads with the General Counsel's office, and, this is not the way we do things. And yet what that uncovered has been so incredibly useful to all the work that we're now here talking about. The fact that people in communities all across the country really wanted to talk about how sustainable communities could be a basis for improving their economy, dealing with the economic and social divides of their communities, getting ready for climate adaptation, preserving the natural assets in their communities, figuring out how in the world they're going to pay for a bunch of stuff that they really want, but they don't know how to do it. This is what people all over the country wanted to talk about. We got thousands of letters. I couldn't believe that when we had these listening sessions all over the country that were sort of formal opportunities for people to talk, that every single place there was a deep understanding of the importance that when we talk about sustainability, we've got to be talking about inclusion, that this has to be for everybody. Now, that became a stepping stone that has helped us in enormous ways. I mean, for those of you who have followed, all the precursors to this movement, the new urbanism, the smart growth movement, all compact development, all that kind of stuff, there's hardly ever been a deep and committed discussion about how these ideas affect everyone and how are we going to make fair communities that everybody benefits from, that this isn't just, you know, working our buns off to get a new transit line so that only a small sliver of the community can be benefited by it. It needs to be for everyone. One of the amazing freedoms, or I guess the leadership that Sean Donovan has really provided, is that he has allowed us to trust that public record and to basically define a set of programs that at their core are really about how do we respond to the needs and concerns that communities have. That's kind of number one. It's not a dogmatic recipe for changing the design of our neighborhoods in specific ways. It is about a set of accountability measures for the way that we spend money. It's about kind of the role that the federal government has in, or the vantage point that the federal government has in looking out across the whole country and being able to see, you know, there are these very significant trends happening. An individual community shouldn't be responsible for tracking those. So at the heart of what we are trying to do with this new program is to design it in ways that really respond to what local communities need and want, trust their instincts, to reward integration and problem solving. And within the context of the HUD Reform Act, that is unbelievably difficult, but it's doable. And to maintain this sort of national perspective that helps us ensure that all these individual actions add up to real positive movement as we go forward. We have two grant competitions going on right now, a regional planning grant program and a more local one called the Challenge planning grant program that we partnered up with DOT and issued the first ever joint request for applications. But we got applications from every state in the country for both of those competitions. That's like, come on, you guys, everybody thinks that this movement is just in a few places. It is not. It is everywhere. It is in tiny, tiny places all the way up to, you know, the biggest regions in the country. And, you know, it is really exciting to see all kinds of communities that, you know, even though I've been on the circuit for years, I never would have thought would be interested in making an application to a program that's totally voluntary, that asks a lot in terms of justifying your actions, in terms of sustainable outcomes. We have to do much more work to educate our compatriots about why we've got to bust out and talk about more things than just housing finance. Great, very important, essential to long-term permanent affordability, but we're not going to make it if we don't bust out a little bit and learn to talk about things other than what our specialty is. And be cogent, you know, and compelling emissaries for a set of ideas that are going to be fundamental to changing the landscape of what gets funded and the rules that govern what gets funded. The other thing I think that's sort of also a little bit crazy is that, okay, so we have this interagency partnership. We're working with our buddies at DOT and EPA, and that's sort of the core starting point group. We're learning the hard truth that every agency is organized totally differently. Even the kind of chain of command is completely different, and that has real implications for what you can do and how you can do it. I just want to thank you all for coming together and continuing to push forward on these issues. As you know, recently as maybe 5 years ago, I was really concerned that we were too far apart, that our specialties were never going to allow folks who primarily come from the housing world to get together with folks from land use policy or transportation investment policy, that, you know, we sort of weren't even able to have a conversation. And it's very clear that we've gotten, you know, we can now talk to each other much more easily, and you're starting to get to the real nitty-gritty. I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is to keep that momentum going and to ensure that we're sharing in sort of an open source kind of way the tricks of making change happen.